I'm 28 and I've been financially independent since college, but apparently that doesn't matter to Warren and Dawn. I woke up Thursday morning to my phone buzzing with notifications from my banking app. Multiple charges totaling over 8 grand. My first thought was fraud, obviously, until I saw the texts. Warren sent the first message at 6:47 a.m. while I was still asleep. We used your credit card for a family cruise. Don't call the bank. It's what you owe us for raising you. Then Dawn chimed in an hour later with, remember when you broke your arm at 7? That ER bill was $3,000. Time to pay up. Here's the thing that everyone needs to understand about my parents. They've always viewed me as an investment that didn't pay dividends. When I graduated college debt-free thanks to scholarships and working my rear end off, Warren actually said I was ungrateful because I didn't need their money anymore. When I bought my own place at 25, Dawn told people I was showing off and trying to make them look bad. They've never once congratulated me on anything I've achieved. The charges kept coming throughout the morning. First-class flight upgrades, casino chips, $2,000 in duty-free shopping. They weren't just taking what they thought I owed them. They were living it up on my dime. Warren texted again around noon saying, we fed you for 18 years. This is nothing compared to what you cost us. But here's what Warren and Dawn don't know. I've been preparing for something like this for 3 years. Not specifically credit card theft, but some kind of financial manipulation or boundary violation. They've been escalating their entitlement behavior since I started making decent money, dropping hints about how I should help family more, and making comments about how successful children take care of their parents. I immediately called my bank and reported the charges as unauthorized. The representative was incredibly helpful once I explained the situation. Apparently, family financial abuse is more common than people think. I changed all my card numbers, updated my security questions, and put fraud alerts on everything. The bank is handling the dispute process. Then I blocked both their numbers. Not because I was emotional or reactive, but because it was time to execute plans I've been thinking about for years. See, Warren and Dawn have always assumed they could manipulate me because I'm their son. They've never considered what happens when someone who actually thinks strategically decides they've had enough. Warren tried calling from Dawn's phone, then from their landline. When those didn't work, he started leaving voicemails that got progressively more unhinged. The last one I heard before blocking that number 2 was him screaming about how I was destroying the family and being vindictive over money. The funny part is they think this is about the $8,000. It's not. I make good money, and I'll get the charges reversed. This is about 28 years of them treating me like property instead of a person. This is about every time they've used guilt, manipulation, and emotional blackmail to try controlling my life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Thursday afternoon, after I'd secured my finances and blocked their direct access to me, I drove to their house, not to confront them or demand answers, but to deliver something I'd been keeping ready for exactly this kind of situation. I pulled into their driveway around 4 p.m. Their car was there, so I knew they were home, probably expecting me to come groveling or demanding explanations. Instead, I walked to their mailbox and left a single black envelope with their names on it. No return address, no explanation, just something they needed to see. I was back in my car and driving away before they even knew I'd been there. By Friday morning, Julie started calling me. Julie has been my friend since high school, and somehow my parents got her number. She said Dawn had called her crying, begging her to get me to answer my phone. According to Julie, Dawn was practically screaming, "What did he do? Answer your phone, please." The thing is, I haven't done anything yet. What I left in that envelope isn't revenge. It's not even a threat. It's just information they didn't know I had. Information about why I've been financially independent since college. Information about certain family dynamics they thought were secret. Information that explains exactly how long I've been planning for this moment. Warren and Dawn raised me to be strategic. They taught me to think long-term and plan for contingencies. They just never considered I might use those skills on them. Julie says they've been calling her every few hours, alternating between demanding she get me to call them back and trying to pump her for information about what I might be planning. She's getting frustrated because she has no idea what's going on. And honestly, I feel bad that they're dragging her into this. But I'm not breaking my silence yet. The cruise charges are still being disputed. My credit is fine. My finances are secure. And Warren and Dawn have exactly zero access to any part of my life anymore. But they don't know that this was always the plan. They think they can still fix this with the right combination of guilt trips and family obligation speeches. They have no idea what they actually started when they decided to steal from me. Holy crap, you guys. The response to my last post was insane. To everyone asking what was in the black envelope. Patience. You'll understand why I couldn't just dump everything in the first post. This is so much bigger than stolen credit cards. So, Julie finally broke yesterday. She'd been getting calls every 2 hours for 4 days straight. And Warren actually showed up at her apartment Saturday morning. Just showed up. Julie lives in a different city, 40 minutes from my parents' house. So, this wasn't a casual visit. He was standing outside her door at 7 a.m. asking if she'd heard from me and whether I'd told her anything about family business. Julie called me right after he left, and she was pissed. She said Warren looked like he hadn't slept in days and kept asking really specific questions about what I might have told her over the years. Questions about our Uncle Henry, questions about Dawn's sister Rita, questions about conversations I might have had about old family stuff that supposedly happened before I was born. Here's where it gets interesting. Julie has known me since high school, right? She's been around for family dinners, holiday parties, all of it. She knows Warren and Dawn pretty well, but she said Warren on Saturday was completely different. Not angry like you'd expect from a parent whose kid was being disrespectful. He was scared, actually terrified. When I told her I'd left something for them, Julie went quiet for a long time. Then she said something that made everything click. She said, "You know, your parents have always talked about you like you were still 12 years old, like you couldn't possibly understand adult situations or remember things that happened when you were younger." That's when I realized Julie has been watching this dynamic for over a decade. She's seen how Warren and Dawn treat me like I'm either completely oblivious or too young to matter. How they have these hushed conversations at family gatherings that stop the second I walk into a room. How they've always acted like there are things about our family that I couldn't possibly know or understand. But here's what Warren and Dawn never considered. I've been financially independent since 22. I own property. I have professional relationships, business contacts, access to information databases through my work. When you spend 6 years building your own life completely separate from your parents, you learn things they never expected you to learn. The envelope contained copies of 3 things. First, the mortgage documents on their house showing they refinanced last year and are underwater by about $40,000. Second, text screenshots from Dawn's phone that her sister Rita sent me 2 years ago during a family argument. Rita was drunk and angry about something Dawn had said, and she forwarded me a whole conversation where Dawn and Warren discussed how I was finally making enough money to help with their situation and how they needed to make him understand his obligations to family. The third thing was a printout of the family group chat that I've been secretly part of for 3 years. Warren's brother Luke added me thinking it was funny, and I never said anything, just watched. 3 years of them discussing me like I wasn't a real person. 3 years of Dawn complaining about how ungrateful I am while simultaneously planning ways to get money from me. 3 years of Warren telling the family that I owe them for raising me and that he was going to make sure I paid up eventually. But the real kicker was the messages from last month. Warren and Dawn spent weeks planning this cruise thing. It wasn't impulsive. They researched exactly how much they could charge before it would trigger fraud alerts. They discussed whether I'd make a big deal about it or just suck it up, because it's family. Dawn actually wrote, "He's too soft to really fight us on this. He'll be mad for a week, then get over it like he always does." The group chat also showed them discussing my work schedule, my travel plans, even my relationship status. Information they could only have gotten by going through my social media obsessively or asking other people about me. They've been tracking my life like I'm a business investment they need to monitor. So, when I left those printouts with a note saying, "I've been watching too," it wasn't a threat. It was just letting them know that their secret family discussions weren't as secret as they thought, that their plans to manipulate me weren't happening in a vacuum, that I've been aware of exactly how they see me for years. Julie said after she heard all this, she understood why Warren was so panicked. It wasn't about the money or even the credit card thing. It was about the fact that their entire approach to dealing with me was built on assumptions that just got completely shattered. They thought they were dealing with someone who didn't know what they were really thinking or planning. Someone who could be managed with the right combination of guilt trips and family obligation speeches. Now they know I've been documenting their behavior for years. They know I've seen every conversation where they called me ungrateful or discussed ways to extract money from me. They know I watched them plan this cruise thing for weeks and decided to let them do it anyway. And that's what's terrifying them. Not that I'm angry about the theft, but that I was prepared for it. That I saw it coming and made conscious decisions about how to handle it. That everything they think they know about me and how I react to conflict is completely wrong. Dawn tried calling Julie again last night. According to Julie, she was crying and kept saying, "He's not supposed to know about those things. And we were just talking. It didn't mean anything." She begged Julie to get me to call them so they could explain everything and work this out as a family. Here's the thing, though. I'm not interested in explanations. I've heard their explanations for years in that group chat. I know exactly what they think of me and exactly how they justify their behavior. The credit card theft wasn't about money they needed. It was about proving that they could still control me. About demonstrating that no matter how independent I got, I was still their property to be managed. But I've been planning for this exact situation since I first saw those group chat messages 3 years ago. Every financial decision I've made, every boundary I've set, every piece of information I've gathered, it was all preparation for the day they'd finally push too far. They want to work this out as a family. But they don't realize they're not dealing with family anymore. They're dealing with someone who's been treating this like a business relationship for years. Someone who's been documenting everything and preparing for the inevitable breakdown. Warren and Dawn trained me to think strategically and plan ahead. They just never imagined I'd use those skills to prepare for war against them. Okay, so remember how I said Warren and Dawn wanted to work this out as a family? Well, they decided to take matters into their own hands. Tuesday evening, I get home from work and there's their car in my driveway. They'd been waiting for 2 hours. According to my neighbor, they walked up to my front door and they got out of the car immediately. Warren started talking before I even acknowledged them. He said they needed to discuss the situation like adults and that I was being unreasonable by cutting off communication. Dawn stood behind him nodding and kept saying, "We're family and family works things out together." Here's the thing, though. I've been waiting for this conversation for 3 years. Ever since I first saw those group chat messages, I've been mentally preparing for the day they'd finally have to face me directly and explain their behavior. So, when Warren said they needed to talk, I unlocked my front door and told them to come inside. The conversation that followed lasted almost 3 hours. I'm going to try to give you the highlights because honestly, some of it was so ridiculous I'm still processing it. Warren started by saying the credit card thing was a misunderstanding, that they'd always planned to pay me back and they just didn't want to ask for help because they knew I'd make a big deal about it. He said they've been struggling financially since his hours got cut last year, and they deserve to have one nice vacation after 30 years of putting their family first. I let him talk for about 10 minutes before I asked him about the group chat messages, specifically the ones where they spent weeks planning exactly how much they could charge before triggering fraud alerts. Warren's face went completely blank for a second. Then he said those messages were taken out of context and that they were just venting frustrations, not making actual plans. Dawn jumped in and started crying, saying I was destroying the family over money and that she never meant for me to see those conversations. She said parents complain about their kids sometimes, and it doesn't mean anything serious. She kept saying they raised me and sacrificed everything for me, and now I was using their private conversations against them like some kind of weapon. But here's where it got really interesting. I asked them directly why they thought I owed them money for raising me. Not the credit card charges, but the fundamental belief that I owed them financially for being their child. Warren said that's just how families work and that successful children help their parents when they're struggling. Dawn said they never asked me for anything before, and this was just making up for all the years they supported me. So, I pulled out my phone and started reading group chat messages. 3 years worth of them discussing my finances, my career moves, my relationships, all filtered through this lens of how it affected what I could potentially contribute to their household. Messages where Warren calculated my probable income based on my job title and location. Messages where Dawn discussed strategies for making me feel guilty enough to offer financial help. They both got really defensive really fast. Warren said, "Everyone talks about their kids' lives and that monitoring my success was just normal parental interest." Dawn said the financial discussions were hypothetical and that they never actually expected me to support them. But then I read the message where Dawn literally wrote, "We need to make him understand that supporting parents is just what adults do." And Warren replied, "He's been independent too long, and he thinks he doesn't owe us anything." The conversation shifted when I asked them about the mortgage refinancing. Warren tried to deny they were in financial trouble, but I had the documents. I knew exactly how much they owed and exactly how underwater they were on the house. Dawn started crying harder and said they were just trying to manage their situation and that it wasn't fair for me to judge them for making difficult financial decisions. But here's the part that really got to me. Warren looked me dead in the eye and said I was being vindictive and cruel by abandoning my parents when they needed help. He said they'd spent 18 years raising me, and the least I could do was show some gratitude by helping them through a rough patch. Dawn said I'd changed since I became successful, and that I'd forgotten where I came from and who supported me when I had nothing. So, I asked them directly if they genuinely believed stealing my credit card information and charging $8,000 without permission was an appropriate way to ask for help. Warren said it wasn't stealing because family money is shared money and that I was being dramatic by treating it like a crime. Dawn said they would have asked directly, but they knew I'd say no because I'd become selfish and only cared about myself. The conversation went in circles for another hour with them alternating between justifying the theft, minimizing the group chat surveillance, and trying to guilt-trip me about family obligations. Warren kept saying I was overreacting and that this whole situation could be resolved if I just agreed to help them with their mortgage payments going forward. Dawn kept crying and saying I was breaking her heart by treating them like criminals instead of parents who made a mistake. But the real breaking point came when Warren said they'd been patient with my independence phase, but that it was time for me to grow up and accept my responsibilities to the family. He said they'd been watching me build my career and accumulate assets while they struggled, and that it was selfish of me to hoard resources while my parents faced financial problems. That's when I told them about the other things I discovered. See, that group chat wasn't just about me. For 3 years, I'd been watching them discuss other family members the same way. Uncle Henry's divorce settlement, Rita's inheritance from their grandmother, Luke's business profits. They'd been treating the entire extended family like a financial resource to be managed and extracted from when needed. I told them I'd been documenting everything and that I had evidence of them manipulating other family members for money over the years. Warren got really angry and said I was twisting normal family conversations into something sinister and that I was being paranoid and vindictive. Dawn said I was hurting people who loved me and that I'd regret destroying family relationships over money. The conversation ended when I told them they had a choice. They could accept that I was no longer available for financial manipulation, and we could potentially rebuild some kind of relationship based on actual respect, or they could continue trying to guilt-trip and manipulate me and face the consequences of that decision. Warren said I was threatening them and that this wasn't how family problems get resolved. Dawn said I'd become a stranger and that she didn't recognize the person I turned into. They left around 10 p.m. with Warren saying this conversation wasn't over and that they weren't giving up on their son just because he was going through a difficult phase. But here's what they still don't understand. This isn't a difficult phase or a temporary reaction to the credit card theft. This is me finally having the conversation I've been preparing for since I first realized they viewed me as a financial asset rather than a person. Everything I've built, every boundary I've set, every piece of information I've gathered, it was all leading to this moment where they'd have to face the reality of how they've been treating me. The credit card charges got fully reversed yesterday. My bank's fraud department said family financial abuse cases often escalate after the initial theft is reported, and they've flagged my accounts for additional monitoring. They also gave me information about financial abuse resources, which was honestly more support than I expected to get. Warren and Dawn think they can still fix this by finding the right combination of guilt trips and family obligation speeches. But they're not dealing with the same person they manipulated for years. They're dealing with someone who's been strategically preparing for war since the moment I realized what they really thought of me. All right, everyone. This is probably going to be my last update on this situation. The fallout has been exactly what I expected, and honestly, I'm done giving Warren and Dawn any more of my mental energy. But you guys have been so supportive through this whole thing that I want to give you the complete picture of how everything played out. So, remember how they said the conversation wasn't over and they weren't giving up on their son? Well, they tried escalating things by involving the extended family. Warren called his brother Luke and Dawn called her sister Rita, both giving carefully edited versions of our conflict where I was the ungrateful son who was abandoning his struggling parents over a simple misunderstanding about money. Warren told Luke that I'd become obsessed with money and was refusing to help my parents during their most difficult time. He said I was holding grudges over normal family conversations and that I was using private information to hurt people who loved me. Dawn told Rita that I'd changed completely since becoming successful and that I was treating them like strangers instead of the parents who sacrificed everything for me. But here's where 3 years of preparation really paid off. See, I wasn't just monitoring that family group chat for evidence about Warren and Dawn. I was also watching how they talked about and manipulated other family members. Uncle Henry's divorce settlement that they tried to get involved in by offering unsolicited advice while secretly calculating how much money he might end up with. Rita's inheritance that they kept asking invasive questions about while discussing in the group chat whether she'd be willing to share it during family emergencies. Luke's business expansion that they researched obsessively while offering financial opinions and secretly estimating his personal wealth. The day after Warren and Dawn started their family pressure campaign, I made some phone calls, not to complain about my parents or ask for support in our conflict, but to share some information that I thought the family should know about. I called Uncle Henry first. The conversation lasted almost an hour because once I started explaining the group chat situation, Henry had a lot of questions. I told him about the messages where Warren and Dawn discussed his divorce settlement details that they couldn't possibly have known unless Rita had shared private family information with them. Specific details about his asset division, his ex-wife's demands, even his legal strategy that he'd only discussed with Rita during their private conversations. Henry was quiet for a long time. Then he said some things about Rita that I won't repeat here. But let's just say he was not happy about his financial business being family group chat entertainment. He also said it explained why Warren had been calling him recently with advice about protecting assets during divorce proceedings and suggestions about financial planning that seemed oddly specific to his situation. The call with Rita was even more revealing. When I told her about the messages where Warren and Dawn calculated her probable inheritance amount and discussed strategies for getting her to share it with the family during financial emergencies, she actually gasped. Rita had no idea that her private conversations with Dawn about their grandmothers had been turned into group chat content where Warren and Dawn analyzed every detail for potential financial benefit. Rita said Dawn had been asking really specific questions about the inheritance timeline and whether Rita was planning to keep everything or share it with family members who might need help. Rita thought Dawn was just being caring and interested in family business. But the group chat messages showed Dawn immediately sharing every detail with Warren so they could strategize about how to position themselves for financial assistance when the inheritance came through. But the conversation with Luke was the most satisfying. Luke had actually been considering offering Warren a job at his company because he thought his brother was struggling financially and needed help. When I showed him the group chat messages where Warren and Dawn criticized his business decisions while simultaneously researching his company's revenue to estimate his personal wealth, Luke got really angry. Luke said Warren had been asking detailed questions about his business operations, his employee costs, his profit margins, all under the guise of being proud of his little brother's success. But the group chat messages showed Warren immediately sharing all this information with Dawn and the rest of the family while making judgmental comments about Luke's spending habits and business choices. Luke was particularly upset about messages where Warren criticized him for buying a new truck while secretly calculating how much money Luke probably had available for family loans. Warren had actually been building a case in the group chat for why Luke should be contributing more to family expenses because his business was doing so well. But the real revelation came when I shared the mortgage documents with all three of them. See, Warren and Dawn had been telling the family for months that they were doing fine financially and that their recent stress was just about adjusting to retirement and some minor health issues. The reality was that they'd been underwater on their house payments for over a year and had been borrowing money from Rita and receiving financial help from Luke under completely false pretenses. Rita discovered that the $3,000 she'd lent Dawn for emergency medical expenses had actually gone toward casino chips and duty-free shopping on their cruise. She had bank records showing the exact date she'd transferred the money. And my credit card statements showed the cruise expenses happening the same week. Dawn had literally used Rita's medical emergency loan to fund their vacation entertainment. Luke found out that the money he'd been quietly contributing to their monthly expenses for 6 months had been used for first-class flight upgrades and premium cruise cabin reservations. Luke had been sending $500 a month because Warren told him they were struggling to keep up with basic household expenses and medication costs. Meanwhile, they were upgrading their vacation arrangements with his financial assistance. The family group chat exploded over the next few days, not with supportive messages for Warren and Dawn, but with family members realizing they'd been systematically manipulated and lied to for years. Rita was furious about being used as a source of gossip and financial information that was immediately shared with the entire family. Henry was angry that his private business had been entertainment for people who weren't even directly involved in his situation. Luke felt completely manipulated and used for his money while being criticized and analyzed behind his back. Rita started going through old conversations with Dawn and realizing that every personal detail she'd shared had probably ended up in the group chat. Her relationship problems, her financial concerns, her health issues, her work stress, all of it had been filtered through Dawn to Warren and turned into family discussion topics. Rita said she felt violated and stupid for trusting Dawn with private information. Henry said the group chat explained why family gatherings had started feeling weird over the past few years. People knew details about his life that he'd never shared directly with them, and conversations felt manipulative in ways he couldn't identify at the time. Now he understood that Warren and Dawn had been collecting information from everyone and redistributing it throughout the family while adding their own commentary and judgment. Luke was angry about the financial surveillance, specifically. He said Warren had been treating his business success like a family resource that should be shared while simultaneously criticizing his financial choices and lifestyle decisions. The group chat messages showed years of Warren discussing Luke's income, his spending habits, his potential availability for family loans, all while maintaining a relationship based on Warren needing help rather than Luke being viewed as a source of money. But here's the part that really hit Warren and Dawn where it hurts. The family meeting that Warren called to address the situation and get everyone to pressure me into reconciling turned into an intervention about their financial manipulation and surveillance behavior. Rita, Henry, and Luke had spent the week comparing notes about conversations they'd had with Warren and Dawn over the years, and the patterns were impossible to ignore. The meeting happened at Rita's house on a Saturday afternoon. Warren and Dawn arrived expecting to present a united family front against my unreasonable behavior and get everyone to pressure me into dropping my complaints and helping with their financial situation. Instead, they walked into a room where Henry, Rita, and Luke had printed copies of group chat messages and were comparing them to their own records of conversations and financial transactions. Warren tried to control the narrative immediately by saying this was all a misunderstanding and that I was using private family conversations out of context to hurt people who loved me. He said families talk about each other and that monitoring everyone's situations was just normal concern and interest. Dawn started crying and said they never meant to hurt anyone and that they were just trying to stay connected to their family during difficult times. But Rita had prepared for this meeting. She'd gone through 3 years of her bank records and matched them against the group chat messages about her financial situation. Every time she'd lent money to Dawn or shared information about her inheritance, there were corresponding group chat discussions where Warren and Dawn analyzed the information and planned their next requests for assistance. Rita presented a timeline showing how Dawn had gradually extracted information about the inheritance by asking seemingly innocent questions over months, then immediately sharing every detail with Warren so they could calculate exactly how much money would be available and when. Rita also showed how her emergency loans to Dawn had coincided with Warren and Dawn's vacation planning and entertainment expenses. Luke had brought his own documentation showing 6 months of financial assistance he'd provided based on Warren's claims about struggling with basic expenses alongside evidence of Warren and Dawn's actual spending during the same period. Luke had been sending money for groceries and utilities while Warren and Dawn were charging first-class travel and luxury vacation experiences. Henry presented the most damaging evidence about their information sharing and manipulation tactics. He'd gone through old text conversations with Rita and identified dozens of times where personal information he'd shared with her in confidence had appeared in group chat discussions within days. Henry said he'd trusted Rita with private details about his divorce, his financial concerns, his health problems, all of which had been immediately shared with the entire family through the group chat. The confrontation lasted almost 4 hours. Warren kept trying to minimize the group chat surveillance by saying families naturally discuss each other's lives and that sharing information was just normal family communication. Dawn alternated between crying about how everyone was misunderstanding their intentions and getting defensive about their right to discuss family business with each other. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the family was done being manipulated. Rita announced she was cutting off all financial support and that she expected to be repaid the money she'd lent for medical expenses that had actually funded vacation entertainment. She also said she was done sharing personal information with Dawn because she couldn't trust it to remain private. Luke said he was ending his monthly contributions to their household expenses immediately and that Warren was no longer being considered for the job position at his company. Luke also said he was reconsidering their entire relationship because he felt manipulated and used for years while being judged and criticized in private family discussions. Henry said he was done with family members who couldn't respect privacy and boundaries and that he was cutting contact with both Warren and Dawn until they could demonstrate genuine understanding of how their behavior had affected everyone. Henry also said he was limiting his communication with Rita until he could trust that their conversations would remain private. The group chat that Warren and Dawn thought was their private family surveillance system became the evidence that turned the entire extended family against them. Every family member now knew exactly how Warren and Dawn had been discussing their personal business, judging their financial decisions, and calculating their potential value as sources of money and support. Warren tried to salvage the situation by saying everyone was overreacting and that this could all be resolved if people would just focus on supporting family members during difficult times instead of holding grudges over private conversations. Dawn said they were being punished for caring about their family and staying involved in everyone's lives. But Rita shut that down immediately. She said caring about family doesn't involve sharing private information without permission or manipulating people into providing financial assistance under false pretenses. Rita said the group chat messages showed years of judgment, criticism, and financial calculation that had nothing to do with genuine care or concern. Luke said he'd been genuinely trying to help his brother through financial difficulties while Warren was secretly criticizing his generosity and planning ways to extract more money. Luke said the betrayal wasn't just about the money, but about the fundamental dishonesty of their relationship and Warren's complete lack of gratitude or respect for his assistance. Henry said the worst part was realizing that family gatherings and personal conversations had been data collection opportunities rather than genuine relationship building. Henry said he felt stupid for trusting people who were immediately sharing his private business with others and using it for entertainment and judgment. The meeting ended with Warren and Dawn completely isolated from the extended family. No one was willing to provide financial assistance, emotional support, or even maintain regular contact until Warren and Dawn could acknowledge their behavior and make genuine amends. But based on their defensive reactions during the confrontation, that acknowledgement wasn't going to happen. Within 2 weeks, Warren and Dawn went from having multiple family members providing financial assistance and emotional support to being completely cut off from the extended family. Their mortgage payment that they'd been partially covering with help from Luke and Rita became impossible to maintain. The social events and family gatherings where they'd been gathering information and building manipulation relationships ended completely. Warren tried calling me multiple times during this period to say that I destroyed the family and that everyone was being unreasonable and vindictive. He said they were facing foreclosure because their family had abandoned them over misunderstandings and gossip. Warren said I was responsible for turning everyone against them and that I needed to fix the situation by convincing the family to resume their support. Dawn left voicemails crying about how she never meant for things to go this far and how they just needed help getting through their financial problems. Dawn said everyone was being cruel and heartless by abandoning them when they needed family support the most. She kept saying they were being punished way too severely for normal family behavior and private conversations. But here's what they still don't understand. This isn't about revenge or vindictiveness. This is about consequences. For 3 years, they surveilled the family, manipulated conversations, extracted money under false pretenses, and treated everyone like financial resources to be managed rather than people to be respected. The credit card theft was just the final escalation of behavior that had been building for years. I didn't destroy their relationships with the family. I just gave everyone the information they needed to make informed decisions about whether they wanted to continue being manipulated. Rita, Henry, and Luke chose to cut them off because they finally understood what had been happening behind their backs for years. The house went into foreclosure proceedings last month. Warren and Dawn are going to have to downsize dramatically and figure out how to live on their actual retirement income instead of the supplemental money they've been extracting from family members through manipulation and guilt trips. They're facing the natural consequences of treating their family like a business opportunity instead of people they loved and respected. Warren called me yesterday with one final attempt at reconciliation. The conversation lasted about 20 minutes, and it was exactly what I expected. He said if I would just help them with the mortgage payment, they could keep the house and we could all move past this family drama. He said I was the only one with enough money to save the situation and that this was my chance to be the bigger person and help my parents when they really needed it. Warren said the family had overreacted to private conversations that didn't mean anything serious and that everyone was being vindictive and cruel by abandoning them during their most difficult time. He said I had the power to fix everything by just stepping up and providing the financial help they needed and that holding grudges was destroying the family unnecessarily. I told him that I'd been the bigger person for 3 years while I watched them plan and execute their manipulation strategies. I'd been the bigger person when I discovered they were surveilling the entire family and using private information for financial planning and entertainment. I'd been the bigger person when they stole from my credit card and told me it was what I owed them for being born. But I was done being the bigger person. They trained me to think strategically and plan long-term. They taught me to prepare for contingencies and protect myself from people who might try to take advantage of me. They just never expected me to use those skills against them when they became the people I needed protection from. Warren said I was being vindictive and that this wasn't how family problems should be resolved. He said they'd made mistakes, but that destroying their lives wasn't an appropriate response to private conversations and financial misunderstandings. Warren said, "You're throwing away your relationship with your parents over money and pride." I told him they'd thrown away their relationship with me the day they decided to treat me like a financial asset instead of a person. I said the credit card theft wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was the culmination of years of viewing me as property that owed them dividends on their parental investment. Warren hung up on me. Dawn tried calling an hour later, but I didn't answer. She left a voicemail saying they were going to lose their house and that I was the only person who could save them. Dawn said she was sorry for any hurt feelings and that they could work everything out if I would just help them through this crisis. But there's nothing to work out. The credit card charges were fully reversed months ago. My finances are secure. My boundaries are established. And Warren and Dawn have zero access to any part of my life. The family members who matter are the ones who respected my boundaries and supported my decisions when they learned the truth about Warren and Dawn's behavior. Warren and Dawn are facing the consequences of their own choices. They chose to surveil the family for years. They chose to manipulate conversations and extract money under false pretenses. They chose to treat everyone like financial resources instead of people deserving of respect and privacy. They chose to steal from my credit card and justify it as money I owed them for existing. Every consequence they're facing now is the direct result of choices they made repeatedly over years. The family members who cut them off did so because they finally understood how they'd been manipulated and used. The financial crisis they're facing exists because they've been living beyond their means with money extracted from family members through guilt trips and false pretenses. The last message I sent them was simple. They spent years planning how to extract money from their family. I spent years planning how to stop them. They thought they were better strategists than me, but I turned out to be a better strategist than they thought I could be. This whole situation taught me that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who respect you the least. Warren and Dawn never saw me as a person with boundaries and rights. They saw me as an investment that should provide returns when they needed money. When I finally showed them who I really was, someone who had been watching and planning and preparing, they couldn't handle the reality that their manipulation had been completely transparent. The house they're losing was never really theirs anyway. It was being partially paid for with money they'd manipulated from family members who trusted them. Now they get to learn what it's like to live within their actual means instead of treating their family like a personal banking system. I'm done with this chapter of my life. Warren and Dawn made their choices, and now they're living with the consequences. I spent 3 years preparing for this moment, and I have no regrets about how it played out. The family members worth maintaining relationships with are the ones who understood my position and supported my decisions. Warren and Dawn can figure out their own lives without using me or anyone else as their personal financial resource.